Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched another colony burn. The screen showed buildings collapsing under plasma fire, people running through streets that would soon be graveyards. This was the 14th world to fall in 3 months. The Crevan Dominion was winning this war, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. The Galactic Coalition had been fighting for 3 years. 3 long years of retreat and defeat. The Crevans were brutal fighters who showed no mercy. They conquered systems, enslaved populations, and destroyed anyone who resisted. 12 systems had already fallen. Millions were dead or worse. Vextar was a Zalarian, a species known for their strategic thinking and calm nature. But even his patience was wearing thin. The Coalition fleet was scattered across a dozen sectors, trying to defend too many places with too few ships. Supply lines were cut. Morale was lower than he had ever seen. His officers barely spoke anymore. They just went through their duties. With the tired movements of soldiers who knew they were losing, a young officer approached him. Thelnis was barely out of the academy, still learning the harsh reality of war. The boy carried a data pad with trembling hands. "Commander, the Council has sent another distress call across all known frequencies," Thelnis said quietly. "They are asking for any species to come help us." Vextar nodded but said nothing. The Coalition had been sending those calls for months. No one had answered. Why would they? Every species in the galaxy knew about the Crevan Dominion. They were feared. Powerful empires stayed neutral rather than risk Crevan anger. Smaller civilizations hid and hoped the war would pass them by. "Commander," Thelnis continued, his voice uncertain. "There is something else. We received a response." That made Vextar turn. "A response? After all this time?" "Show me," he ordered. Thelnis activated the display. A message played, the translation coming through clearly. The voice was female, speaking with a strange accent that the computer struggled to process. "This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the United Nations Space Command. We received your distress signal. We are coming to help. Expect our arrival in the Orion sector within 10 days. The message ended. Vextar stared at the screen. United Nations? He had never heard of them. The computer searched its database and found minimal information. A species called humanity. Recently discovered on the edge of the galaxy. No military records. No previous contact with any coalition species. "What do we know about these humans?" Vextar asked. Thelnis read from his data pad. "Not much, sir. They come from a planet called Earth. It is classified as a high-gravity death world. The atmosphere has higher oxygen content than most habitable planets. The dominant species evolved as predators. A death world. That was unusual. Most spacefaring species came from gentler environments. Evolution on harsh planets rarely produced civilizations advanced enough for space travel. Those that survived such worlds were either incredibly tough or incredibly lucky." "What kind of predators?" Vextar asked. "Pursuit hunters, sir. They evolved to chase prey over long distances until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They have remarkable stamina and endurance." Vextar considered this. Most coalition species were prey animals or omnivores. The idea of a predator species made him uncomfortable, but they needed help, and he could not afford to be picky about where it came from. "Send a message to the Council," he ordered. "Tell them we have a response from an unknown species. Request permission to coordinate with them when they arrive." "Yes, sir," Thelnis said, hurrying away. Over the next few days, Coalition intelligence worked to gather more information about humanity. What they learned was confusing. Human history was filled with war, constant, endless warfare. They had been fighting each other for thousands of years before finally uniting under a single government. Even after achieving space travel, human colonies had fought civil wars. But that was not the most disturbing part. Human military doctrine was unlike anything the Coalition had encountered. Most civilized species viewed war as a necessary evil, something to conduct with honor and minimal casualties. Humans embraced total war. They built weapons designed not just to defeat enemies but to completely overwhelm them. They studied the art of warfare the way other species studied music or poetry. The Coalition Council held an emergency meeting. Vextar attended via hologram. The debate was heated. Some council members argued that any help was better than none. Others worried about inviting a potentially dangerous species into Coalition space. What if the humans were as bad as the Krevans? In the end, desperation won. The council voted to accept human assistance. They had no other choice. Without help, the war would be lost within 6 months. Vextar returned to his duties, preparing for the human arrival. He doubled patrols in the Orion sector and repositioned his ships to create a defensive line. If the humans were coming, he wanted to be ready to support them or stop them, depending on what kind of allies they turned out to be. On the 10th day, sensors detected a massive hyperspace distortion. Vextar rushed to the bridge. Thelnis was already there, staring at the display with wide eyes. "Commander," the young officer whispered. "They're here." The hyperspace window opened, and ships began emerging. Not a small task force, not a token gesture of support, a full battle fleet. Vexitar counted the vessels as they appeared. 50 ships, 70, 100. The numbers kept climbing. By the time the last vessel emerged, he had counted 200 warships. 200. The entire Coalition fleet in this sector numbered fewer than 150 ships. The humans had sent more vessels than the Coalition could field. The human ships were different from anything Vextar had seen before. They were not elegant or beautiful. They were built for function. Every surface was covered in weapons, missile pods, railgun turrets, energy projectors. These were warships, in the truest sense, designed with no purpose except to fight and win. A communication channel opened. The same female voice from the message spoke. "This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the UNS Valiant. We are ready to assist. What do you need?" Vextar took a deep breath. The humans were here. An entire fleet of predators, from a death world armed with more weapons than he could count. They had answered the call when no one else would. Now he had to trust that they were truly here to help. "Admiral Morrison," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "Welcome to the Orion sector. We have much to discuss." As he spoke, Vextar watched the human fleet arrange itself into attack formation. They moved with military precision, each ship taking its assigned position without hesitation. These were not explorers or merchants playing at war. These were warriors who knew exactly what they were doing. For the first time in months, Vextar felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Perhaps the war was not lost after all. Perhaps humanity would make the difference. But as he looked at those heavily armed warships, he could not help wondering what price the galaxy would pay for inviting such dangerous allies into their conflict. The humans had arrived. Now everyone would see what happened when Death World predators decided to go to war. Admiral Kate Morrison studied the tactical display in her command chair aboard the UNS Valiant. The Coalition fleet positions appeared on her screen, scattered and defensive. She had seen this pattern before. These were the formations of people who had been losing for too long. They were trying not to lose more ground instead of trying to win. Her second officer, Captain Danny Price, stood beside her. He was reviewing data from Coalition intelligence, his face expressionless as he read report after report of Kraven victories. "They need more than reinforcements," Danny said quietly. "They need a complete change in strategy." "I know," Kate replied, "but we need to earn their trust first. Let them see what we can do." A communication request came through. Kate accepted it, and Commander Vextar appeared on her screen. He was tall and thin with pale blue skin and large eyes. A Zalarian, according to the species database, known for being careful and thoughtful. "Admiral Morrison," Vexitar began. "Thank you for coming. Your fleet is far larger than we expected." "Commander," Kate replied, "when Earth receives a distress call, we respond with appropriate force. Tell me about your enemy." For the next hour, Vextar explained the situation. The Kraven Dominion had superior numbers and brutal tactics. They fought without honor, targeting civilian populations to break morale. Their fleet was spread across conquered systems, but they could concentrate forces quickly when needed. The Coalition had tried defensive strategies, diplomatic solutions, and limited counterattacks. Nothing had worked. Kate listened without interrupting. When Vexitar finished, she shared her assessment. The coalition was fighting reactively, always responding to Crevan moves instead of forcing the enemy to react to them. They needed to go on the offensive, hit hard and fast before the Crevans could prepare. Vexitar looked uncomfortable with this idea. His species valued careful planning and minimal casualties. The human approach seemed reckless to him. "Admiral, with respect, we have tried aggressive tactics before. The losses were severe," he said. "You tried aggressive tactics with defensive weapons and defensive thinking," Kate replied. "Trust me, Commander. We do this differently." The conversation ended with an agreement. Vexitar would send a liaison officer to the Valiant to observe human operations. Kate would share tactical data with Coalition Command. Both sides would prepare for joint operations, though what those operations would be remained unclear. The next day, Junior Officer Thelness arrived aboard the Valiant. The young Zalarian was nervous as he stepped off the shuttle. Human ships were built differently from Coalition vessels. Everything was metal and function. No decorative elements. No comfortable spaces. Just weapons, engines, and crew quarters. Lieutenant Sophie Grant met him at the docking bay. She was the communications officer, a human woman with short brown hair and a friendly smile. She shook Thelness's hand, a human greeting he had read about but never experienced. Her grip was strong. "Welcome aboard," Sophie said. "I will show you around and help you understand how we operate." As they walked through the ship, Thelness was amazed by what he saw. Human crew members moved with purpose and speed. Every action was efficient. The ship hummed with barely contained energy. In the weapons bay, technicians worked on railgun systems that could fire projectiles at a fraction of light speed. In engineering, Chief Barry Turner supervised teams maintaining the massive reactors that powered the vessel. Barry was a large human with graying hair and kind eyes. He explained the ship's systems to Thelness with obvious pride. The Valiant could redirect power from engines to weapons to shields in seconds. Most Coalition ships took minutes to make such changes. "Speed is survival," Barry said. "In battle, whoever adapts fastest usually wins." That evening, Thelness attended a strategy briefing. Captain Danny Price presented tactical analysis to the senior officers. He spoke about something called total war. The idea was to use overwhelming force to break the enemy's will to fight. Not just defeat them in battle, but make them understand that continuing the war was pointless. The Coalition fought to minimize casualties and damage. Humans fought to end wars as quickly as possible, even if that meant higher initial costs. It was a fundamental difference in philosophy that made Thelness uncomfortable. On the third day of human presence in the sector, Crevan scouts detected the new arrivals. Warlord Kraxthar, the Crevan leader, received reports about the human fleet. He was not impressed. Another alien species coming to die for the Coalition. He had crushed a dozen such fleets already. Kraxthar ordered a probe attack. Send a squadron of raiders to test the human defenses, learn their capabilities, destroy a few ships to send a message, then withdraw and plan a larger assault. 12 Crevan warships entered the sector where the human fleet was positioned. They were fast attack craft designed for hit-and-run tactics. The Crevan commanders expected to find easy targets. New arrivals were always disorganized and vulnerable. What they found instead was a fleet on full alert. Human sensors had detected the Crevan approach 2 hours before the raiders realized they had been spotted. Admiral Morrison watched their approach on her display. She did not order an immediate counterattack. She wanted to see how the Crevans fought. The raiders came in fast, firing plasma cannons at maximum range. They targeted what appeared to be support vessels, hoping for quick kills. But human point defense systems activated instantly. Streams of railgun fire intercepted incoming plasma bolts. Missiles launched from multiple ships, creating overlapping fields of fire that the raiders had to avoid. The Crevan commanders realized too late that they had made a mistake. These were not easy targets. These were professional warriors who knew exactly what they were doing. They tried to withdraw, but human pursuit craft were already moving to cut off their escape. Admiral Morrison gave the order to engage fully. Human destroyers opened fire with their main batteries. The railgun slugs crossed space at incredible velocity. Each impact tore through Crevan shields and armor like paper. Missile volleys followed, targeting engines and weapon systems with precision. Electronic warfare systems jammed Crevan communications. The raiders could not coordinate their defense or call for help. They were alone, blind, and outmatched. The battle lasted 8 minutes. All 12 Crevan ships were destroyed. Not damaged, not disabled. Completely destroyed. Debris fields marked where they had been. The human fleet had suffered no casualties. A few ships reported minor shield damage, but nothing significant. Aboard the Coalition command ship, Commander Vextar and his officers watched the battle in shocked silence. They had seen Coalition forces fight Crevan raiders before. Such engagements usually lasted hours and resulted in casualties on both sides. The humans had ended it in minutes with perfect efficiency. Thelnus was on the Valiant Bridge when the battle happened. He watched human crew members work with calm professionalism. There was no panic, no confusion, just trained people doing their jobs. When the last Crevan ship exploded, Lieutenant Sophie Grant turned to him with a small smile. "Welcome to human warfare," she said simply. Thelnus sent a report to Commander Vextar that evening. He tried to find words to explain what he had witnessed. The humans were not just skilled fighters. They were something different. Something the galaxy had never seen before. They approached war the way most species approached art or science. With dedication, precision, and a depth of knowledge that came from thousands of years of practice. Warlord Kraxthar received news of his lost raiders with anger. He had underestimated these humans. That would not happen again. He began planning a larger attack, one that would crush this new threat before it could become a real problem. But he did not understand what he was facing. Humans had been fighting wars since before they discovered fire. They had turned warfare into a science, studying every aspect of combat with the same intensity they applied to exploring space or curing diseases. The Cravens were brutal and experienced. But humanity had something more. They had 10,000 years of hard lessons learned in blood and fire. Admiral Morrison reviewed the battle data with her command staff. The Cravens were strong but predictable. Their tactics were sound but not innovative. She could work with this. She began planning the next operation, one that would show both the Coalition and the Crevan Dominion what humanity was truly capable of when they decided to go to war. The strategy meeting took place aboard the Coalition command ship. Commander Vextar had called together all senior officers from both the Coalition and human fleets. The room was crowded with different species, each one watching Admiral Kate Morrison with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Kate stood at the center display, showing a tactical map of the Theta system. It was a Crevan stronghold, heavily defended with over 200 enemy ships. The system contained shipyards, supply depots, and 3 occupied worlds. Taking it would be difficult and dangerous. "We strike here and we strike now," Kate said, her voice calm and confident. "The Crevens think they have time to prepare after losing their scouts. They are wrong. We attack in 36 hours. Several Coalition officers began speaking at once. This was madness. The fleet needed time to prepare. Intelligence gathering alone would take weeks. Attacking a fortified system without proper planning was suicide. Captain Danny Price stepped forward. He activated detailed tactical analysis on the display, showing Crevan fleet positions, supply routes, and communication networks. He had spent the last 3 days studying every piece of intelligence the Coalition possessed. "The Crevan forces in Theta system are distributed across multiple orbital positions," Danny explained. "They are protecting assets, not preparing for an assault. If we jump in with coordinated strikes on key targets, we can destroy their ability to respond before they can organize a defense." Commander Vextar studied the plan carefully. It was aggressive, perhaps too aggressive, but he remembered watching the humans destroy those Crevan raiders in 8 minutes. Maybe aggressive was exactly what the Coalition needed. "This plan requires complete commitment," Vextar said slowly. "If we attack and then retreat, we will lose many ships for nothing. We must be willing to see it through." "Commander, humans do not start fights we are not prepared to finish," Kate replied. "Once we enter that system, the only way out is victory. Are your forces ready for that?" Vextar looked around the room at his fellow Coalition officers. He saw fear but also determination. They had been losing this war for 3 years. Perhaps it was time to take a real risk. "We are ready," he said firmly. The next 36 hours were filled with preparation. Human and Coalition crews worked together, coordinating attack patterns and communication protocols. Chief Engineer Barry Turner helped Coalition engineers upgrade their power systems for faster response times. Lieutenant Sophie Grant trained coalition communications officers in human tactical language. Junior Officer Thelness worked closely with Sophie, learning the human approach to military operations. He was amazed by how much planning went into what appeared to be a spontaneous attack. Every ship had specific targets. Every weapon system had designated firing patterns. Nothing was left to chance. When the time came to move, the combined fleet jumped to hyperspace as a single unit. 200 human warships and 120 coalition vessels, all moving toward the same target with the same purpose. It was the largest offensive operation the coalition had attempted in 2 years. In the Theta system, Warlord Kraxthar sat in his command center reviewing reports. The loss of his scout squadron had been unfortunate, but not critical. He had ordered additional ships to the sector to deal with the humans when the time came. For now, he focused on consolidating his control over the recently conquered worlds. Then his sensors officer shouted a warning. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. Massive fleet emerging. Too close. Too fast. The human and coalition fleet exited hyperspace already in attack formation. They had jumped much closer to the planet than was considered safe, trading caution for surprise. It worked. Crevan forces were scattered across the system, unprepared for immediate combat. Admiral Morrison gave the order to engage. The human fleet split into 6 groups, each targeting a different Crevan position. Carriers launched fighter wings. Destroyers accelerated toward the shipyards. Cruisers moved to intercept enemy warships. The battle began with a massive human missile barrage. Thousands of warheads filled space, overwhelming Crevan point defenses. Explosions bloomed across the system as missiles found their targets. Shipyards shattered. Supply stations exploded. Communications arrays went dark. Kraxthar tried to organize a response, but his fleet was in chaos. Ships scrambled to reach their battle stations. Commanders shouted orders over jammed communication channels. The humans had struck so fast and so hard that the Crevan advantage in numbers meant nothing in those first critical minutes. Human fighters moved through space like a swarm of angry insects. The pilots were incredible, pulling maneuvers that would kill most species from the acceleration forces alone. They targeted Crevan weapon systems and engines with precision strikes, leaving enemy ships crippled and helpless. Aboard the Valiant, Chief Barry Turner managed power distribution for the entire fleet. His team worked without rest, ensuring that human ships always had energy where they needed it. Weapons fire, shield reinforcement, engine boost. The power flowed where it was needed most, keeping human vessels fighting at peak efficiency. The Cravens were not helpless. They were experienced warriors who had conquered a dozen systems. Their plasma cannons tore through human shields when they could land hits. A human destroyer took a direct hit to its engine section and exploded, taking 200 crew members with it. Another ship lost power and drifted, vulnerable to enemy fire until coalition vessels moved to protect it. But the humans did not break. Ships that were damaged kept fighting. Crews worked through injuries to keep weapons firing. This was the human way. Fight until you win or until you cannot fight anymore. There was no middle ground. Commander Vexitar led coalition forces in support of the human assault. His ships provided covering fire for human vessels pushing deep into enemy formations. He had learned from watching the humans. Do not hesitate. Do not give the enemy time to think. Keep pushing forward until they break. Junior Officer Thelness coordinated rescue operations from his position on the Coalition command ship. He watched as human ships pulled damaged Coalition vessels out of danger. The humans protected their allies with the same intensity they attacked their enemies. It was impressive and humbling. 6 hours into the battle, the Crevan fleet began to collapse. Too many ships damaged, too many commanders dead, communications completely destroyed. What had been a coordinated defense became a desperate fight for survival. Warlord Kraxthar realized he was losing. The humans had done something no enemy had accomplished before. They had taken his superior numbers and made them irrelevant through speed, coordination, and overwhelming firepower. He gave the order to retreat, hoping to save what ships he could, but Admiral Morrison had anticipated this. Human pursuit craft were already positioned to intercept fleeing vessels. Captain Danny Price coordinated the pursuit, directing ships to cut off escape routes. The message was clear: no one leaves. By the time the battle ended, the Theta system was liberated. Over 200 Crevan warships had been destroyed. The shipyards were ruins. The supply network was shattered. 3 worlds were free from Crevan occupation. The cost had been significant. 17 human ships destroyed, 30 more requiring major repairs, 12 coalition vessels lost, thousands of crew members dead or wounded. But the strategic victory was enormous. The Crevan Dominion had suffered its first major defeat. Kate stood on the bridge of the Valiant and looked at the casualty reports. Every lost ship hurt. Every dead crew member was someone's friend or family. But she had been a soldier long enough to understand that sometimes victory required sacrifice. The question was always whether the cost was worth the gain. She looked at the tactical map showing the newly liberated system. 3 worlds free, millions of people no longer under Crevan control, a major Crevan supply hub destroyed. Yes, she decided. The cost was worth it. Commander Vextar contacted her later that evening. His face on the screen showed exhaustion, but also something else. Respect. Admiral Morrison, on behalf of the Coalition, I thank you. Your forces fought with courage and skill. We could not have achieved this victory without you. Commander, we are just getting started, Kate replied. This was one system. The Crevans still control 11 more. We have a lot of work to do. And she meant it. The battle for Theta system was not the end. It was the beginning. The Crevan Dominion was about to learn what happened when humanity decided that something needed to be stopped. They would learn that humans did not fight wars to win battles. They fought wars to end them completely and permanently. News of the Theta system victory spread across the galaxy, faster than any ship could travel. Coalition worlds that had been preparing to surrender suddenly found hope. Resistance movements on occupied planets grew bolder. Crevan commanders who had felt invincible now looked over their shoulders and wondered when the humans would come for them. Warlord Kraxthar stood in his private chamber and tried to understand what had gone wrong. He had fought for 30 years, conquered dozens of worlds, and crushed every enemy who stood against him. Now a single battle had shaken the entire Dominion. His subordinates questioned his leadership. Some even whispered about replacing him. The problem was simple. The humans fought differently than any species he had encountered. They did not seek honorable combat or limited objectives. They wanted total victory, and they pursued it with a focus that was almost frightening. Kraxthar needed to change his approach, or he would lose this war. Admiral Kate Morrison gave her fleet no time to rest. She called a meeting of all senior officers just 20 hours after the Theta battle ended. Repair crews were still working on damaged ships and medical teams were treating the wounded. But Kate understood something that the Coalition was still learning. In war, momentum mattered more than perfection. We attack 3 more systems simultaneously, she announced, showing targets on the tactical display, Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon. All 3 have Crevan forces that are vulnerable right now. They are scared and disorganized. We hit them before they can recover. Captain Danny Price presented the detailed plans. The human fleet would split into 3 battle groups. Kate would command the assault on Gamma. Danny would lead the attack on Delta. A Coalition admiral named Kelvar, who had trained with human advisors, would take Epsilon with human support. Commander Vexitar expressed concern. The fleet needed maintenance. Crews needed rest. But Kate explained the human military concept of operational tempo. Keep the enemy reacting. Never give them time to prepare. Force them to make mistakes through constant pressure. In human history, we learned that the side that controls the pace of battle usually wins, Kate said. Right now, we control the pace. We must keep it that way. The fleet divided and prepared for the 3 attacks. Chief Engineer Barry Turner worked around the clock with his teams, getting damaged ships ready for combat. Lieutenant Sophie Grant coordinated between the 3 battle groups, ensuring that each one could operate independently while remaining part of the overall strategy. Junior Officer Thelnis stayed with Kate's battle group aboard the Valiant. He had requested this assignment. After watching the humans fight at Theta, he wanted to learn everything he could about their methods. Commander Vextar had approved, recognizing that Thelnis could become a bridge between human and Coalition forces. The 3 attacks launched within hours of each other. Each battle group jumped to hyperspace, heading for their assigned targets. The coordination required was impressive. 3 separate forces operating light years apart, all moving according to the same timeline. In the Gamma system, Kate's forces found a heavily fortified Crevan shipyard. The facility was protected by defensive platforms and a fleet of over 80 warships. Intelligence had suggested this would be the hardest target of the 3. Kate decided on a direct assault. No fancy maneuvers, no clever tricks, just overwhelming firepower applied with precision. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace and immediately opened fire on the defensive platforms. Railgun slugs tore through shields and armor. Missile volleys saturated the area around the shipyard. The Crevan defenders responded quickly, but they were still adjusting to the human style of warfare. They expected a cautious approach, probing attacks to test defenses. Instead, they got a full assault from the opening moment. Human ships pushed forward aggressively, accepting damage to close the range and increase their accuracy. Kate authorized the use of human marines to board the shipyard. This was risky. Close quarters combat was brutal and costly, but the shipyard was too valuable to destroy completely. They needed to capture it intact if possible. The Marines launched from assault ships and crossed the distance to the station under heavy fire. Human combat armor protected them from most of the incoming fire, but several Marines were hit and died before reaching their target. The survivors breached the station hull and began fighting through the corridors. Crevan defenders fought hard, but human Marines were trained for exactly this kind of combat. They moved through the station in coordinated teams, clearing each section methodically. The fighting was intense and personal. Both sides took heavy casualties, but slowly, room by room, the humans took control. After 6 hours of combat, the Gamma system was secured. The shipyard was captured. The Crevan fleet was destroyed. Kate's forces had lost 3 ships and 200 Marines, but they had achieved their objective. In the Delta system, Captain Danny Price used a different approach. His battle group was smaller, so he relied on speed and deception. He sent false sensor signals to make the Crevans think his force was much larger than it actually was. Then he hit them from an unexpected angle while they were positioning to face the phantom threat. The Crevans realized too late that they had been tricked. By the time they understood what was happening, Danny's ships were already among them, firing at point-blank range. The battle was chaotic and violent, but it ended with a complete human victory. Admiral Kelvar led the assault on the Epsilon system with human advisors guiding coalition forces. He used tactics he had learned from watching Kate and Danny. Fast jumps, immediate engagement, overwhelming firepower. The coalition crews performed well, adapting to the human style. The Epsilon system fell after 4 hours of fighting, 3 systems liberated in a single day. The coalition celebrated. Citizens on occupied worlds began to believe that freedom might be possible. The Crevan Dominion was reeling from losses they had never imagined possible. But Warlord Kraxthar was not defeated yet. He made a decision that would determine the outcome of the war. He ordered all Crevan forces to withdraw from their scattered positions and concentrate into one massive fleet. He would abandon conquered worlds if necessary. The important thing was to gather enough strength to face the humans in a single decisive battle. Coalition intelligence detected the Crevan fleet movements and reported to Kate. She studied the data carefully. Kraxthar was consolidating his forces, over 400 warships pulling back to a central location. It was a bold move and a dangerous one. He wants a decisive battle, Danny said, looking at the same reports. One big fight to settle everything. Then we will give him one, Kate replied. Recall all battle groups. I want every ship we have ready for combat. Contact Commander Vextar and request full coalition support. This is it. The battle that will end the war. Commander Vextar did not hesitate. He mobilized every coalition vessel that could fight. This was the moment they had been working toward. A chance to destroy the Crevan Dominion completely. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. Chief Barry Turner and his engineering teams prepared the human fleet for the biggest battle they had ever fought. He implemented experimental weapon systems that had been in testing, energy weapons that could fire longer before overheating, shield generators that could absorb more damage, electronic warfare systems that could blind entire fleets. The risks were significant. Untested systems could fail at critical moments. But Barry believed in his people and their work. These innovations would give humanity an edge in the coming fight. Captain Danny Price worked on the battle plan. It was the most complex operation he had ever designed. Success required perfect timing and coordination from over 300 ships. One mistake could result in disaster. But Danny had confidence in the crews he had trained and the allies they had fought beside. Both fleets moved toward the Sigma system, a neutral sector that would become the greatest battlefield the galaxy had seen in decades. Warlord Crackstar arrived first and deployed his forces in a defensive formation. He had more ships than the humans and Coalition combined. Numbers would decide this battle, or so he believed. The human and Coalition fleet jumped into the Sigma system and took up positions at the edge of sensor range. Kate looked at the tactical display showing the massive Kravan fleet. They were outnumbered almost 2-1. Every ship, every crew member was about to face the greatest challenge of their lives. She opened a channel to all ships in the Allied fleet. Her voice was calm and steady. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. We came to this sector because we heard people crying for help. We came because it was the right thing to do. Today we will show the Kravan Dominion, and everyone watching what happens when peaceful species are threatened. Today we fight not just for victory but for justice. All ships prepare for battle." The fleet moved forward as one. Humanity and the Coalition. Different species, different cultures, but united in purpose. They were going to end this war, or they were going to die trying. There would be no third option. The battle began not with caution but with fury. Admiral Kate Morrison ordered the human fleet to accelerate to attack speed, while still at extreme range. Warlord Crackstar watched in disbelief as the human ships charged forward. He had expected a careful approach, probing attacks to test his defenses. Instead, the humans came at him like a pack of wild animals. The first human salvo fired from beyond what the Kravens believed was effective range. Railgun slugs crossed the void at incredible velocity. By the time Kraven sensors detected the incoming fire, the projectiles had already struck. 40 Kraven ships exploded in the opening seconds. Crackstar's carefully arranged defensive formation dissolved into chaos as ships scrambled to respond. Captain Danny Price watched the battle unfold from his position aboard a destroyer. His plan was working perfectly. The human carriers had launched over 1,000 fighters, small craft that filled space like a swarm. But these fighters were not attacking Kraven ships directly. They were deploying electromagnetic pulse devices across the battlefield. The effect was devastating. Kraven electronic systems began failing throughout the fleet. Communications jammed. Targeting computers crashed. Defensive shields flickered and died. Chief Barry Turner's experimental weapons were performing exactly as designed. The Kraven fleet was being systematically blinded and disabled. Commander Vextar led Coalition forces against the Kraven flanks, while human vessels hammered their center. He had learned much from fighting alongside humanity. Do not hesitate. Do not give the enemy time to think. Strike hard and keep striking until they break. His ships moved with confidence they had not shown in years. Junior Officer Thelness coordinated rescue operations from the Coalition command ship. He watched as damaged vessels were pulled back from the fighting, repaired quickly and sent back into battle. The logistics system that Lieutenant Sophie Grant had helped design was keeping the Allied fleet at fighting strength, even as ships took damage. Warlord Crackstar tried desperately to rally his forces. He shouted orders to his commanders demanding counterattacks and defensive formations, but his words never reached most of his fleet. The human electronic warfare had severed his control over the battle. Kraven ships fought as individuals, brave but uncoordinated. They were strong fighters facing an enemy that fought as a single organism. A Kraven battleship managed to target the Valiant with its plasma cannons. The shots tore through human shields and damaged the ship's hull. Kate felt the deck shake beneath her feet as systems failed around her. But she remained calm, issuing orders to reroute power and maintain weapons fire. The Valiant was hurt but still fighting. Barry Turner worked in the damaged engineering section, his hands moving quickly to repair critical systems. Fire suppression foam covered the floor, and the air was thick with smoke. One of his team members was dead, killed when a plasma bolt penetrated the hull. But Barry kept working. The ship needed power, and he would provide it or die trying. The battle raged for 3 hours. Ships died on both sides. Explosions lit up space like deadly fireworks. Human destroyers took direct hits and broke apart. Coalition cruisers were overwhelmed by Kraven fighters. But the Allied fleet kept pushing forward, maintained its formation, and never stopped attacking. This was the difference between the two sides. The Kravens fought well when everything went according to plan, but when things went wrong, when their formation broke and their communications failed, they struggled. Humans had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They knew that no plan survived contact with the enemy. They adapted, improvised, and kept fighting no matter what happened. The Kraven fleet began to break. Ships attempted to flee, but human pursuit craft were faster. Danny Price coordinated the pursuit. directing vessels to cut off escape routes. Every Kreven ship that tried to run was hunted down and destroyed. Kate had been clear in her orders. No one leaves this battle. Warlord Crackstar realized the battle was lost. His invincible fleet was being annihilated by an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. The humans fought like the predators they were, relentless and merciless. He opened a communication channel to the human flagship. "Admiral Morrison," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "I surrender. Order your ships to cease fire." Kate looked at the tactical display. Over 300 Kreven ships destroyed. The Dominion's military power was shattered. She could end this battle right now with a single command. "All ships cease fire," she ordered. "Warlord Crackstar, you and your surviving forces will power down weapons and surrender. Any ship that does not comply will be destroyed." Some Kreven ships surrendered. Others fought to the end, refusing to accept defeat. The human fleet destroyed those vessels without hesitation. By the time the battle finally ended, less than 50 Kreven warships remained intact. The rest were debris fields spreading across the Sigma system. The cost had been heavy. 30 human ships destroyed, 20 coalition vessels lost, thousands of crew members dead. But the strategic victory was absolute. The Kreven Dominion's military power had been annihilated in a single day. Warlord Crackstar was brought aboard the Valiant in chains. He stood before Kate in the conference room, his pride broken but his curiosity burning. He needed to understand how he had lost. "How did you defeat me?" he asked. "My fleet was larger. My warriors were experienced. How did you win?" Kate regarded him calmly. "You asked the wrong question, Warlord. You should ask why we fought. You conquered and enslaved because you wanted power. We fought because people asked for help. When you fight for yourself, you stop when the cost becomes too high. When you fight for others, you do not stop until the job is done. That is why we won." In the weeks that followed, Coalition and human forces liberated the remaining Kreven-occupied systems. Resistance was light. With their main fleet destroyed and their leader captured, most Kreven commanders surrendered without a fight. The 3-year war was over. Commander Vextar met with Kate to discuss the future. The Coalition wanted humanity to remain as allies and protectors, but there was also fear. A species capable of such devastating warfare could easily become conquerors themselves. Kate understood these concerns. She addressed them directly. "Commander, humanity did not come here seeking power or territory. We came because we heard a call for help. Yes, we are capable of terrible violence, but we reserve that violence for those who threaten the innocent. We are warriors, but we are also protectors. That is who we choose to be." A formal alliance was signed between humanity and the Galactic Coalition. Human ships would patrol key systems, training Coalition forces in advanced tactics. In return, humanity gained access to galactic trade networks and scientific knowledge. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. Captain Danny Price was promoted to Admiral and given command of a joint task force dedicated to hunting down remaining Kreven raiders. Lieutenant Sophie Grant became the chief diplomatic liaison, working to strengthen bonds between species. Chief Barry Turner led a technology exchange program, sharing human engineering knowledge while learning from Coalition advances. Junior Officer Thelness, who had watched humanity fight from the beginning, was promoted and assigned to the human embassy on the Coalition capital world. He had learned much from his time with the humans. Most importantly, he had learned that strength without purpose was meaningless. The humans were strong, but they used that strength to protect others. That was what made them different. As the human fleet prepared to leave the Orion sector, Kate stood on the bridge of the Valiant one last time. She looked out at the stars and thought about what they had accomplished. They had come as strangers to a desperate people. They had fought and bled beside new allies. They had shown the galaxy that humanity stood for something more than just survival, but this was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and there were many species who needed help against oppressors. Humanity had found its role in the galactic community. They would be the ones who answered when peaceful people cried out against violence. They would be the shield that protected the defenseless. Back on Earth, military commanders reviewed the campaign in the Orion sector. They discussed lessons learned and strategies for future interventions. New battle fleets were already under construction in orbital shipyards. Each one carried the same mission that Kate's fleet had fulfilled. Defend the defenseless. Fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Show the galaxy what humans are capable of when they decide that something is worth protecting. The message was clear to all who would listen. Humanity had emerged from their small corner of the galaxy. They were warriors from a death world, evolved through millions of years of conflict and survival. They had the capacity for terrible violence, but they also had compassion, honor, and a deep belief that power should be used to protect the weak. The Crevan Dominion had learned this lesson too late. They had believed that strength alone determined the outcome of wars. But they had faced an enemy who fought not just with strength but with purpose. And in the end, purpose had proven stronger than any weapon. Kate looked at the stars one more time before the Valiant jumped to hyperspace. Somewhere out there, other species were suffering under other oppressors. Other calls for help would come, and when they did, humanity would answer.